I was first diagnosed with motor neurone disease about 15 months ago, after a period of 6 months of various symptoms and then various tests in hospitals around the UK. After being diagnosed, which was obviously a huge shock to me and my wife, I immediately set out to find out what I could about the illness and to find what potential therapies, drugs and research was going on, which I could either avail myself or help push forward. And I was hugely shocked in discovering that, in talking to my doctors, that there was still only one drug which had been licensed for motor neurone disease, and that had been licensed over 20 years before. That prompted me to look more closely at the whole situation about drug innovation and therapy innovation for motor neurone disease, but also rarer illnesses in general. And that led me to found the campaign for access to medicine.
It's very challenging to develop a new medicine. First of all, you need to have a very good understanding of the basic scientific methods by which the disease is occurring. With many of the smaller, less common diseases, we don't really have good models for the mechanisms of that disease. Because only when you really understand the scientific mechanisms of what's going on can you then start to intervene. Now, there is a lot of scientific research going on into rare diseases. The difficulty is sometimes how do you translate that into an actual drug?
Having seen my friend die 20 years ago and then realised I've got the same condition, but there have been really no significant advances in drugs available, makes me feel that we've got to get a move on. And to see that primarily it's the regulations that are slowing the whole process down, reducing the amount of money that pharmaceutical companies and others are prepared to invest in this area, and in and of itself just taking years to go through one particular set of drug trials just means that we could be waiting an awful long time to find what is probably a combination of drugs that is needed to cure this or slow this down and many other similar conditions.
We are grateful to any patient that wants to take part in a clinical trial, because without clinical trials we will never have medical advances. Where that boundary is in terms of safety is obviously something for the individual patient to think about, but it is also something we have to think about as an industry, and regulators have to think about as to how much risk we can let a patient take upon. And I think it's a really interesting ethical question.
Government is the major source of delay, because it's the government who's the regulator, it's the government who is able to push bodies like NICE, the licensing bodies, and it is government who liaises with drugs companies to bring this channel of research through quicker and the pipeline of drugs back onto the market quicker.
If you have a very serious disease, from your personal point of view as a patient, you're prepared to take a much greater risk of side effects and of the drug not working. And I think there need to be mechanisms whereby patients can be empowered to take their own choices and to decide what level of risk they wish to take on.
We want to get new drugs onto the market much quicker than they are at the moment.
So we definitely need a more flexible approach. We need to safeguard patients for certain. Patients living with motor neurone disease don't have time, but they are willing to accept risk from drugs that might harm them, because they know that no treatment at all simply means their disease is going to continue. I think we need to treat some diseases as more urgent and special cases, and I think motor neurone disease is an example where if we were to remove some of the bureaucratic hurdles with the appropriate safeguards, we could make more rapid progress.
Another interesting coincidental development is the Centre for Accelerating Medical Innovation, which is being headed up by Dr. Richard Barker, also at Oxford University. They are doing a lot of work, and have done a lot of work, into the background behind why various drugs and therapeutics are not coming to market faster, and have already been incredibly supportive and providing a lot of evidence for our campaign.
It's really important that this campaign is being initiated by a patient, because I believe the patient voice hasn't been sufficiently heard in this whole debate up till now. After all, that's what it's all about. That's what's necessary to turn the kind of discoveries made in a laboratory like this into usable treatments for patients.
My background is unusually as a statistician, so I totally understand why the current drug regime and testing regime is in place. But one can see that it's been put in place for the great majority of situations when the whole population could be affected by a bad drug. But what we're talking about here are patient groups with very small numbers and drugs that would not be exposed to the population at large. The benefit for these patients is enormous. The risk, to be absolutely frank, is minimal, given that these people have been, unfortunately, given limited life expectancy because of their conditions. In the end, everything has to be tested on people to determine their effectiveness. That's where we need as many people as possible, and the more people will mean that time frame can be compressed dramatically.
We know there will be no miracles. You know, if it was easy, it would have happened. But if we all work together, we will continue to make progress towards the goal where many currently intractable or incurable conditions can become treatable, curable or preventable.
Several people a day die in the UK from motor neuron disease, and the reality is that in the last few decades we've made very little progress in lengthening their survival. We've made some progress in improving their quality of life, but it still remains one of the most feared diseases in medicine. And I think in addition to the distress it causes, actually it serves as an example of a disease in which we can probably learn a huge amount about the brain and why these other degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's occur. By understanding motor neuron disease, I firmly believe we'll be in a better position to conquer Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease.
I think that for most people who have MND or other similar illnesses, one of the things that drives them on is their feeling that they can still contribute in some meaningful way.
Unless we as a nation, we as a society, we as a world actually recognise that as the population grows older, diseases of the ageing nervous system threaten the very fabric of our society, because it takes people out of work to look after elderly relatives with disabling conditions. And unless we can actually really try and create a healthier old age where people are not suffering from degenerative disorders, we face a situation where we simply will not be able to function as a society. Patients have a critical role to play in raising awareness, and people who are brave enough during a very difficult time for them to go onto the public stage and tell people what the disease means for them have a huge impact.